Welcome to our explainer. Today, we're digging into the fundamentals of tracking, which is, believe it or not, one of humanity's oldest sciences. We're going to see how three really key environmental factors, the ground itself, the weather, and the light, are constantly shaping every single clue a tracker has to read. Okay, so let's start with this powerful idea from our source. There's this myth that nature is just an open book that anyone can read. But the reality? It's way more complex. An expert tracker isn't just reading what's obviously there, they have to interpret what's missing, figuring out the story from clues that are subtle and often incomplete. They have to, as Louis Liebenberg puts it, read into the sand. So this mind map here kind of lays out the whole scope of the art of tracking. Our focus today is right here in the chapter called Fundamentals of the Art. And inside that, we're zooming in on the subchapter on environmental factors, basically the physical conditions that really dictate what a tracker can and cannot see. We're going to break this down into three parts. First up, the ground story, how the surface itself dictates what we can read. Then we'll look at the great editor, how weather is always changing the trail. And finally, seeing the unseen, why light and shadow can reveal clues you'd otherwise totally miss. So let's start with the canvas for any track, the substrate. The type of ground an animal moves across is probably the single biggest factor in determining what kind of story it leaves behind for us to find. Right, so this is the key concept here. Information content. Think of it like the resolution on a photograph. A track left in the perfect substrate, say wet sand, can tell you an animal's species, its size, maybe even its age or condition. But on a really poor substrate like hard rock, you might only know that, well, something passed by.
And just look at the difference here. It's night and day. On soft ground like mud, you get this incredible wealth of detail. The source even notes that an antelope's toes might splay out as its foot sinks in, leaving a super rich print. But on hard ground, the signs are so minimal. A tracker might just be looking for a tiny scuffed patch, or even a single overturned pebble, with its darker unweathered side suddenly facing up.
And this brings us to an absolutely fundamental skill. To even spot these tiny, subtle disturbances, especially on hard ground, a tracker has to have this deep, almost built-in knowledge of what that environment looks like when it's undisturbed. It's only because they know what's normal that anything abnormal, the sign, suddenly pops out and becomes visible. Oh, and before we move on, let's just clarify a key term here. Spoor. It doesn't just mean footprints. Spoor is the technical term for every sign an animal leaves. We're talking a bent blade of grass, some discarded food, even urine and scent markings. It's the entire vocabulary of the trail. Okay, let's move on to our second big factor. If the substrate is the canvas, you can think of the weather as the great editor. It's constantly changing, erasing, and sometimes even clarifying the story that's been written on the ground. Now, the most powerful forces here, wind and rain, are a classic double-edged sword for a tracker. They can be an incredible help, or they can be a total disaster. Think about it this way. A good, strong wind or a bit of rain can actually wipe away all the old, confusing tracks. This creates a clean slate, which is great because it means any new track you find is guaranteed to be fresh. That's a huge advantage. But of course, that very same weather can completely obliterate the trail you're trying to follow, leaving you with absolutely nothing. The sun also plays a really critical role, mostly as a clock. The heat from the sun determines exactly how fast moisture evaporates from, say, a disturbed leaf, or a splash mark, or fresh droppings. These subtle changes give an experienced tracker a remarkably accurate sense of how old a track is, especially when it's super fresh. All right, time for our final piece of the puzzle, light. See, the ability to spot a track isn't just about having good eyesight. It's all about the quality of the light, which is why the time of day can literally make or break a pursuit. So, let me ask you, based on that, when do you think tracking would be the easiest? If you guessed early morning or late afternoon, you are exactly right. When the sun is low in the sky, it casts these long, deep shadows from every tiny little ridge in a footprint, making the track just pop. But at midday, the sun is directly overhead, and those same tracks can become almost invisible, completely washed out in the bright light. And this right here is a key technique. A tracker will always try to position themselves so the track is between them and the sun. This angle makes sure the light casts shadows back towards them, making that spoor as clear as it can possibly be. So, what does this all add up to? Well, when you start combining an understanding of the ground, the weather, and the light, you begin to realize that tracking isn't just some physical skill, it's actually a cognitive science. A tracker is basically running a scientific experiment in real time. They analyze all these variables, the substrate, the weather, the light. They form a hypothesis, like, okay, I think the animal turned left here. Then they immediately test that hypothesis by looking for the next piece of evidence, constantly refining their theory as they go. The source actually calls this hypothetico-deductive reasoning. And this ancient science has profound modern importance. Today, expert trackers are absolutely essential in wildlife conservation, in ecological research, where they can study animal behavior without disturbing them, and critically, in anti-poaching units, where they can track intruders, often stopping them before any harm is done.
All right, let's do a quick recap of the key takeaways from all this.
First, the substrate is everything. It's what determines how much information a track can even hold. Second, weather is a dynamic force. It can either give you a clean slate or wipe the slate clean completely. And third, light is the key to visibility. A good tracker knows how to use the low sun to make shadows their greatest ally. And that leaves us with a final thought. We've seen how trackers learn to read these incredible stories written on the ground. So the next time you're outside, just take a moment to look down. What tiny stories of passage, of weather, of time are being written right there at your feet, just waiting for someone to notice?